Welcome to Socially Unacceptable, the only podcast for marketers, PR professionals, entrepreneurs looking to grow their brands that actually celebrates the biggest marketing mistakes, mishaps, and misfortunes. And today is no different than that. Today in the studio, we've got a man who I've been connected to for probably about 15, 20 years, but he's been in public relations for 29 years. I'll let him know that today. Mr. Stephen Waddington. Stephen is an expert in public relations. He's worked for some of the biggest international agencies, including Weber Shandwick and Ketchum, and he's even sold 2 agencies himself, which he talks about in this piece, which is really, really interesting. So, if you want to know about what it's like to sell an agency, that's an interesting chat. Today, he's the managing partner of Wads Incorporated. I don't know where he came up with the name, but we'll have to ask him that as well. He runs that with his wife, Sarah, who is also a CBE and is, as he describes, a force of nature. She's brilliant on Twitter as well. You want to check her out. Together, they advise agencies from the marketing sphere on how to run much more effectively. So today's the chat is much more about communications and how communications is affected by disruptive technology. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. There's a little bit of AI in there as well if you want. So without further ado, let's get into the episode and let the man speak for himself. Here you go.
The auto-generation stuff is terrifying from the perspective of being weaponized. You don't know anymore what content with Biden is real and what's not, because there's so much false information out there. It's terrifying. I haven't looked at that market at all.
What have you learned from running agencies successfully through those kind of challenging periods?
I guess there's 2 things. First thing is sticking to clients and doing exceptional work. Because they'll stay with you and stay loyal. That's the first thing. Second thing is really strong fiscal management. There's just been some really bad practice around ghosting and the phantom pitch thing where you go out to and a client goes out to 6 companies or 8 companies, immediately red flag, don't push it.
Well, God, we've had loads that we've turned down in decent brands as well. I'm just how many are you going to? Oh, we're going to 8. We had one that said 13 once.
Yeah, and it's a very well-known brand. And they're going to 13 agencies. So what's your view on should agencies be paid to pitch?
Great.
I mean, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Why are they laughing?
Because it's hilarious. They've been saying that since I started.
Welcome to Socially Unacceptable, from f***ups to fame, the marketing podcast that celebrates the professional mishaps, mistakes and misjudgments while delivering valuable marketing and life lessons in the time it takes you to eat your lunch.
Today we're lucky enough to be joined by Mr. Stephen Waddington, soon to be Dr. Stephen Waddington.
3 years, 4 years.
Well, not long.
If I don't it out.
That's what this is a perfect show for that, mate. So thanks for joining us, Stephen. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. It's good to be in Leeds and to be with you guys.
Yeah, good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. So we want to talk to you about disruption in communication. So you've been in PR for, and I've done the maths on this, 29 years.
Have you?
Yeah.
Is that how long?
Yeah, it's 29 years. It's 1994.
Right.
And you started your career.
You've done proper research.
Oh, yeah, it was
Yeah,
proper
that's
research.
impressive, Chris. I like it.
And you started your career, you really committed to it by doing a degree in electronics, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So how did you get into PR then?
Yeah, that was my first did engineering, and I didn't like so many kids. I've got my son, Dan, 17 at the moment, doing his A-levels, just doesn't know what he wants to do. And how you expected to make choices at that age, and was reasonably competent at both English and sciences. Had a natural aptitude, I guess, for engineering, and thought that would be interesting. None of my family had ever gone to university. Found a degree at Salford University, which looked really interesting because there's a lot of application in it. It was a time when the microelectronics industry in the UK was really, really booming around Cambridge, and it seemed to make sense. Did 3 years, never do a degree in engineering at university. It's one of those degrees where the classroom time was 5 or 6 hours a day, and then you have labs on top of that. So effectively your contact time was full time. And that was tough. I did a year out in industry, absolutely hated it. It was
Where at?
Year on the working for a consulting engineer called Mott MacDonald on the Dartford River Tunnel, doing commissioning a toll booth system.
This is not where I thought this was going to go.
On nights, and it was awful. It was really well, it was unsociable.
Yeah,
reasonable money, but it's more to life, isn't there? Went back and did my original. Went back and finished it, and qualified. But then decided I didn't want to do engineering.
So how did you get your first job then? Because that's a jump, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So I did. I got offered onto the trainee scheme at Mott MacDonald, but decided I started looking around for roles to do technical writing because I'd recognised that all the way actually through university I'd been writing for a magazine that Maplin used to publish. You might remember it, Electronics. Sort of been freelancing. I'd always had a sort of entrepreneurial glint and ability to make money on the side, and so I'd done that. Had a natural aptitude for it and quite enjoyed it. So I became a technical writer and got a job in a PR agency that happened to work for ARM, as it was, Advanced Risk Machines. When it was literally 12 people in Cambridge in a barn when it first started back in 1995.
And now, just yesterday, listed on the New York Stock Exchange as the first British export. Wow. And that is timely.
So fast forward a few years into the world of PR.
Yeah.
So I now understand your kind of focus on disruption and technology and arguably where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah.
How did you kind of take that leap then from where you started into very senior levels in PR agencies?
I reckon so. I always say I've benefited at every aspect of my career from an aspect of change in the market, and you frame that as disruption. So initially, it's the build up. When microelectronics became a thing in the mid 90s, then the internet, the end of the 90s, then the application layer, the plumbing, and then the application layer that was built out onto the internet, and then the shift from PC to mobile and the shift to social media. And so at every juncture, I've sort of tried to be ahead or tried to be on the wave and ride that wave and, managed to do it. And here we are again. We've got AI happening right at the moment. It's happening again. So there's that. And then there's just, as you say, 29 years. You're around in the industry for 29 years. You go through the cycles of the economic cycles and, recognize the patterns. And so I guess those two things, the confluence of those two things is, where I've built my career.
So you worked for Weber Shandwick, right? That was your second job. So your first job was at an agency.
Small agency called MMC.
And then you moved up to Weber Shandwick.
Well, it was Weber. Weber, it was called Weber at the time, run by a guy called Larry Weber, incredible man, sort of 6'5", 6'6", huge personality, who built out this, influencer agency way before we called agencies influencer agencies, but was right at the vanguard of the application layer being built on the internet. He did the merger with Shandwick, became Weber Shandwick.
Oh, right. Well, interesting. So then, and then from there you went, is that when you set up Rainier?
Yeah. Then Steve Earle and I set up Rainier. We wanted to build, this was at the time, the late 90s, incredible time, where everybody was building a business out on the back of the internet. All our mates were doing startups. And so, with the cockiness of youth, believed that we could run an agency better than our bosses could run an agency.
And how did you find that?
And so,
with the show being about fuck ups.
No, that literally is how every agency starts. That a bunch of creative people get together and think, the culture here is a bit shit, or we could do this better than ourselves, or we're earning a load of money here for that when we aren't seeing the value that we think we're worth. And yeah, it's how every agency starts.
So Rainier, how many did you get to? How long were you going?
Rainier got to 28 people. You've probably got the data in front of you yourself. Got to 28 people. Billing 2.5 million. Grew really fast on the back of the build out of the internet. And, fortuitous. And we sold it into...
What year was that? You sold it?
You tell me, 2005, 2006?
Yeah, I was going to say, because I started in 2000 in PR, and I joined on the .com, right on the wave of the .com boom, just as you're talking about there. And then I was also right on the way. Then a year later, the .com crash happened. So that would have been 3 or 4 years after that. Yeah. So you didn't sell on the peak of it. You sold just after. Did that affect it, or or were you not that plugged into it? Did it affect?
Effective and massively, because you're seeing it. I mean, we're going through an economic downturn at the moment, and you see, the private equity market catches a cold. Early stage companies don't get reinvested. Everything gets really, really tight and challenging. And we had 2 or 3 years of that before it then recovered.
Yeah, cool. So then you finished Rainier.
Yeah.
And then what did you do then? Because what interested me here, like having done my research, is
proper forensic.
Is you closed the agent, you sold the agency February, and then March you set up again another one. How did you manage to do that?
No, so we sold. This is positioning fuck up. Call it what you will. It's probably a fuck up. I'm going to frame it as a fuck up because we sold the agency into a company called Lowy Group. Lowy Group is very typical of marketing services groups, or was, in that an entrepreneur raises some capital and uses that capital to buy and grow a group by basically leveraging. It's like rental properties, using the profits from one to buy another, which is great when a market's on the upturn.
Yeah.
When a market goes on the downturn, like 2008, then it's really, really challenging. In preparing for today, you'd asked me to talk about my greatest fuck up and exiting agencies and so forth. And I think selling Rainier too early was a.
You should have held it. Should have held it longer.
Well, so what we did a deal where we took Rainier into Lowy, and then there were 3 agencies within Lowy, 3 PR agencies in Lowy. And Steve and I brought them all together under a modern proposition called Speed, which is why you see there was this switch. We literally did it.
Right, that makes sense.
On a turn. So there were Mantra, BMA and Rainier that came together to become Speed around a modern proposition of as you say. We had traditional media, social media, the internet, websites and apps, and that pay-so model was started to be talked about as an integrated proposition. And Steve and I developed a business around that. Yeah, I guess I learned from that there are lots of. I actually learned this from Sarah, my wife, as well. There are lots of ways to extract value from a business. At the time, in early 30s, the seeming natural way to do it was you built scale very quickly and then sold, collected your money and moved on to the next one. Yeah. But actually, there's lots of ways to do it.
Yeah.
So taking a step back then, you've obviously run and managed agencies through fairly serious economic downturns. Yeah. What have you learned from running agencies successfully through those kind of challenging periods?
I guess there's 2 things. First thing is sticking to clients and doing exceptional work. Because they'll stay with you and stay loyal through whatever you have to, whatever the circumstances. And I have relationships that have, people become friends and that I continue to work with. That's the first thing. Second thing is really strong fiscal management. So get a good financial director or financial manager who's across all the numbers and is able to give you the data. And, stick on collections, make sure you've got good terms. It's basic stuff, but so many people don't do it well.
Yeah, I suppose we, from our own experience, COVID was that first major shock to the system, wasn't it? And I think we learned more in probably 3 months than we've learned in 10 years.
Had controlled growth every year for 10 years, and we lost, I think it was 85% of revenue in 24 hours. And it was just, I mean, but that's not just us, that's everybody out there, every business owner out there. Like I say, I give them, like, you have been through the shit if you went through that period because it was horrendous. Because being in a service industry, you had to be open for some clients and not for others, which was And it was like a bloody balancing act. And then you were getting people being upset that they were being furloughed and people that weren't being furloughed upset that they weren't sat in the garden drinking wine. Yeah. It was a difficult situation.
So kind of bringing it up to speed then, COVID, what happened to the kind of the role of the PR advisor or the PR consultant in corporations then? Presumably, we suddenly became front and center.
Well, so there was whiplash. There was the situation Chris just described where you know, like in the immediate aftermath, there was the weekend in March 2020 where we're all packed up our laptops, went home and, you know, probably ignored email because did you realize every single email that came in was like, sorry, we're going to have to cut. Sorry, we're going to have to cut. And there was a period of you know, hiatus for about 6 weeks where it was just dreadful. I was managing a business, a digital agency at the time, and yeah, it was really, really challenging. And you know, the furlough scheme came in place, but that added a level of jeopardy because, as you say, you've got the cultural issues within an organisation about, you know, how do you operate within the scheme and treat everybody equitably. The only way you can do that is have really open and candid conversations, and that's incredibly hard in a remote environment.
Back to back as well.
Yeah.
It was like literally one after the other if you've got a number of staff. Was that Metia when you were?
Yeah, that was Metia.
Interesting.
But there was then this moment when we sort of began to get our heads around, you know, the issue. Organizations retooled and reorganized themselves, and in doing that, went through a huge amount of complex disruption where they needed to, you know, they needed communications or public relations just to help deal with that situation. So reorganizing their supply chains, reorganizing and reconfiguring teams. So we had a very front and center role in that. And then anybody that was working in public relations within the public sector around safety, around health, you know, was front and center as part of the response to it. And that continued right the way through, you know, the 18 months of the COVID crisis.
So where are we at now then? Has that kind of, remained that kind of?
I did two. So Waddington is a product of COVID because, you know, Sarah and I was stuck at home thinking, so many things changed for everybody during that time. And I just recognized the opportunity to sort of do what I'd been thinking about doing for really 4 or 5 years, but I hadn't had the bravery to do it. And that was go out alone and start a professional advisory firm. So it created the opportunity and space to do that and reorganize. We did a couple of projects very early on, one for the Government Communication Service, looking at the role of professional communications and the impact of COVID on that. And you're right, we saw this elevation. And then we did another for the NHS, create a community from basically through the north of England, through 13 NHS trusts, and brought together the comms directors and really for therapy as much as anything, and to share best practice. And there, every single individual was part of Gold Command, and you know, the highest management group within the organisation, right at the front and centre. And yeah, you're right. It's reverted in almost all organisations now, or is reverting. It's being unwound.
Back to the level we were at before.
Back to the level we're at.
That's disheartening, isn't it? So what do we need to do to kind of build?
It's not disheartening. It happens. And you know, and it's partly why I'm in Leeds, that out of that work, I spotted that moment, and I thought, blimey, there is something has happened here to public relations, and finally we've been banging on about it being recognised strategically by management, being paid properly. You know, along with other professional services, this is our moment. And so I started this relationship with Leeds Business School at Beckett, looking at these issues, and that's turned out into a doctoral project. And one of the things we found as part of that work is there are these situations where, you know, leaders of an organization, the CEO, will call on expert advice when they're in a media firestorm, when they've got issues with leadership within the leadership team, relationship issues, when there is, you know, a crisis situation. And COVID was one of those situations, but it reverts as soon as the crisis passes.
So do you actually do So you're advised now, and you help businesses, agency owners, and stuff like that, mentoring type stuff. Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you actually do you do any public relations? When was the last press release you sent out?
That's a really good question. We wrote a paper actually on AI in PR.
Yeah, we've read it. We've read it
back in March. Yeah. So I wrote the press release about that. Actually, I edited the press. Well? I edited the press release that GPT.
The ChatGPT wrote.
GPT.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. So sorry. Do I still practice? No.
Well, that leads us quite nicely onto AI then, doesn't it? So we're really interested in kind of disruption and those kind of disruptive technologies or happenings in the world of PR that people have to get on board with. Is it fair to say AI is the disruptive technology of our times, or is there other things we need to be concerned about as well and aware of?
So AI is one of those technologies that's been around for, since the 1950s. What we've got at the moment, though, is a confluence of computing power, large language models, and the ability to interact with a natural language. And for good or bad, OpenAI, and we can debate whether it was ethically sound, released its large language model in November on the world, and suddenly everybody, AI went from being talked about in research and product development teams to suddenly it's part of every boardroom conversation. And from a risk perspective, in public relations, though, you can see, that at every level there is a potential for it to be disruptive. And that disruption could make us work smarter, could make us work more effectively. It might, help to save cost, and particularly around labour. So there are a whole range of issues there. I mean, embedded within your workflow already, I have no doubt you're probably transcribing this podcast using Otter AI, right?
Yep.
Brilliant piece of technology that will then, start to extract from that, key themes. It will start to write contact reports if you've,
everyone's favourite job.
Well, yeah, but then,
we hate it, don't we? Let's be honest.
It's like a half a day job. So, if you can get a first draft out of Otter, then away you go. It's much better. We're using it loads, and anywhere where you've got a stakeholder in an interview, you want to capture the response, then you might as well record it. Invite your bot to the meeting, record it, and capture it. I think what's really interesting is then when when it starts to analyze the data it gets back and tell you, the sentiment of the different speakers in the room. Chris, you really should cheer up.
Yeah, you really should cheer up and chip in more. You haven't said enough in the meeting.
Share a voice in the meeting. Well, you've been a bit quiet. Speak.
So we did a webinar, a few hundred marketers the other day on this, and I did a couple of live demos. One with Bard, and it's hilarious because I asked it to write a live while we're doing this video webinar. I asked it to write a biography on William Ockenden of Prohibition PR. And interestingly, I'd already done it on me to see what it pulled out, and it wrote a biography of Will, and it said that he liked to play golf, and he's never played golf in his life. Generalisms, and this leads me to the next question is right, because the problem with AI is it's the average of averages. So just like all these SEO, Surfer, and all these other tools, you're averaging the average of the average. And also, it makes shit up. It does AI hallucinations, and it's creating content that's not real. So we could be in the area now of communications with disinformation, I think. And COVID's a good example of that. There was loads of disinformation with COVID.
So there's two aspects to this, and I think I'm really concerned. So sorry, let's just back up and think about 2010, 2008, 2009, 2010, when Steve Earle and I wrote a book called Brand Anarchy and then Brand Vandals. So basically sales books for the agency that were running. And we looked at the potential for social media to, damage reputations and what organizations can do with it. At no point when we wrote those books did we envisage people actually going and weaponizing social media, and seeing some of the corruption that you see, and what happens on X, Twitter, TikTok, so forth. You think about now, if you use generative AI, ChatGPT, Claude, or Bard, to create content that you then push out on social media with, elections coming up, as we know, in the next 12 months in the US and in the UK. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
The elections thing's really frightening.
It is terrifying.
I'm sure.
Because there's just no regulation. I mean, these systems have been OpenAI made this technology available back in November last year without any guardrails whatsoever, and it's sort of been retrofitting.
And you've got the people like Mo Gardner and all those lot leaving Google because it's not ethical.
They've been fired. Yeah, well, not being fired. Sorry, not being fired, but yeah, they've walked out because they
don't trust it.
They don't trust it. No.
Well, and if they don't trust it and they've made it, holy shit! What does that mean for the rest of us?
It's a concern.
So as
it's not
challenge you
though.
The second point, I challenge you though on. So you're talking about generative AI.
Yeah.
I challenge you on. Yeah, and all the excitement's on that because apparently it's like, it is like magic. I do think there's something weird happened in our psyche as well, where we're ascribing human characteristics onto, what is effectively a machine.
Yeah.
Suddenly we're saying please and thank you, and it's. Now I don't know. I've done that. We've always done that with things like Siri or Alexa, right? Because you're in front of your kids, and it's we should be polite, but all of a sudden we're ascribing like these human characteristics to command line prompts on a browser interface.
What you've just said there is the reason why I bought Alexa, however many years ago when it was new, is because I thought it was going to be what ChatGPT is. It doesn't seem to have got any cleverer. Alexa,
no,
the body doesn't seem to have got any smarter, even after all these years.
I think I use it for setting an egg timer, and that's about it.
Well, ChatGPT is as intelligent as Einstein, and in the next 5 months, I've done it, I've banged on the table, in the next 5 months, it's going to be 10 times more intelligent than that, and more intelligent than we can comprehend. Really? Alexa isn't?
I think you're focused on the generative technology, and that's one aspect of it. And you're right, we've all seen the hallucinations, and you ask it to write a biography of yourself, and you're right, it will get the nearest middle-aged white man it can find, and you'll end up playing golf. But reductive AI is, I think, really interesting, and the application of like Otter, where you're getting it to do you're getting machine to do transcription. That's an example of reductive AI. If you're asking it to look at large documents and interrogate those documents from a certain perspective, that's incredibly useful, because suddenly you're extending the capability of your own what you can do with your own physical human.
Yeah, I loved your example of like upload you do a live demo in your AI chat where you upload your white paper and then ask it to ask the application to write you a press release, and it is the beginning of content, and it's good enough to go as an exec, but it's not the finished. It's not something you'd be proud of, and it's still got a lot of Americanisms in it as well, hasn't it?
First draft. It's the first draft. The real power I've found, if you're uploading a transcript or you're uploading a complex document, research papers and so forth, and you're asking it to extract key themes, key arguments, and so forth, that's incredibly useful. So creating more shit content, the internet's got enough. The
internet's full of. When I first met Will, right, we were doing. We met the agency that was doing content marketing for the sock shop. Do you remember them? Oh. And this guy was working in content, and he was writing. Was it 50 blogs a week on socks? I was like, fuck me, no one can pay me.
He was
that
a sock
much.
expert, wasn't he? That guy.
Yeah, God.
So okay, taking a step back, I feel like the bigger PR agencies, the more innovative PR agencies, get AI and they're starting to learn about AI, but we're in a bit of a bubble. So what about these agencies that aren't terribly sophisticated, or kind of comms people or marketing people at brands that, mid-sized brands that aren't particularly techie? What advice would you give to them regarding AI? Should they upskill immediately? Do they need to know about it? Can they sit in the wings for a little while?
I think you need to know about it from the risk perspective, and Chris has done a good job at winding us all up about that. Definitely, if not least because what's out there in the public sphere, what's your agency providing to you, and how's it generating that, or people you work with. So you need to be aware of it from a risk perspective. I think there's a lot of hype. We're right at the peak of the Gartner curve. There's a lot of hype around and lots of shiny new toys, and every single day there's another 10, another 10 tools that are going to do, this, that, and the other. So there's an awful lot of hype around it. But I think, you need a group of people within your organization who are looking at this and figuring, deconstructing workflow and figuring out where you could use it within your workflow, and then running some tests and experiments.
Are you using it every day in your workflow?
Yeah.
I am as well.
Every single day.
Already. It's crazy.
Every single day.
And then from a tools perspective, I noticed you've kind of shared an article about written an article about the top AI tools people should be concerned with now. Have you got any recommendations where people can start? We've all heard about ChatGPT, but what else?
So ChatGPT is great. There's a large language model called Claude, created by a startup called Anthropic. We've been using that a lot.
And what does that do?
Well, so it works exactly like ChatGPT, but I've just found the results are better from it in terms of the reductive capabilities. So you can upload a document or series of documents and start asking it questions around those documents. Incredibly useful. So, for example, you're creating a briefing book. You've got you're putting someone forward for an interview. You ask it. You basically put it into the role of a journalist and ask what are the hardest questions a journalist would ask if they wanted to challenge someone around a particular topic, and it will start providing that material for you.
Any other tools you want to talk about? I've noticed an awful lot of sort of video tools and image generating tools.
Oh God, that Gordon Ramsay video that we shared on the webinar.
Yeah. Everyone looks like a waxwork, don't they?
His face kept like changing. Yeah, it was like melting. But it was Gordon Ramsay's voice. It was all auto generated.
Yeah, the auto generation stuff is terrifying from the perspective of being weaponized. You don't know anymore what content with the Biden is real and what's not. Because there's so much false information out there. That's terrifying. I haven't looked at that market at all.
No.
Or the audio generation, but
I'll be honest with you, the video's shit. It's shit at the moment. From what we've seen, the tools that are out there, they're not that. The video generation's not great yet, but it's going to get better.
Well, it's getting better every
month. Yeah. So, but the voice stuff is amazing. The fact that you can transcribe it from
a single word,
from one word, like from a podcast, we can generate a whole interview with you, even though you're not even there. It's mad.
So ethically, then, what should we be aware of, and what are the main?
So this is a real issue in that there's no regulatory environment around this, and the same happened with social media. You cannot create law. And have it waiting on the shelf for technologies to be invented. It's always reactive, but there's nothing, and there's no sign. If you think about what's happening in the UK at the moment, it's hard. I can't imagine they'll find any time within the next parliamentary term before the election in 2024. I mean, it could happen January 2025. It's more likely to happen towards the end of next year. There's no time to get any sort of regulation through, although the issues are being well discussed within the Lords and the parliamentary group within Westminster, within the Commons. Same in the US. The one market, the one area where there does seem to be some good progressive conversations, particularly from a citizen perspective around creating guardrails around this technology, is in the European Union.
So what are the implications of that? It's the Wild West.
It is the Wild West. It is the Wild West. And Chris described that, the ethics teams, there's obviously been a tension within the tech vendors and between the product teams and the ethics teams, to the point that the ethics teams have all walked. So, there's no guardrails. There's no guardrails, so
and the regulation teams are getting smaller and smaller.
We should be concerned. We should absolutely be concerned, because we're coming to a moment with the elections where absolute damage could be caused.
So, outside of AI, big issue, and we could talk about that all day. What other disruption are we seeing in the PR industry, or is everything kind of focused on AI at the moment?
There's a lot of discourse on AI. There's the perennial conversation that's the focus of my research around management, the conversation with the management. There's the economy, and the issues that's causing for everybody. That's driving us, I think, to focus on effectiveness, which is good. It's got to be good, and that's been a conversation, for the 29 years I've been working in the industry. We do finally seem to be making progress there, though. So the economy measurement, management.
You published stuff quite a lot on the economy and how the sector is doing. What is the economy just not doing very well, from what I can tell?
No, and I don't see. Well, I think actually, we say that there was this. We did publish some analysis back in April, which was talking about the impact of the economy on the agency landscape, and it's there's phantom pitches being pushed out, ghosting, really bad behaviour amongst the client community. The impact on work day to day. There's a lot of short-termism, a lot of budgets being pulled and throttled back. I think that's sort of played out now, and we're sort of it feels that we're sort of learning to live within the constraints and the operating environment that we're working in. So everyone's, yes, they're focused on value, but we're outspending. I mean, here we are in the centre of Leeds, right? We're Friday lunchtime, and all the pubs and bars are busy.
Yeah, people have still got time to go out and get drunk or have a few drinks on a Friday afternoon.
Sports events busy, arenas, Taylor Swift, busy, packed out, sold out. So there's like two speeds to the economy.
Agency retainer fees don't grow at all.
No,
Shocker.
No.
You mentioned then about, we don't need to dig into this too much, about the ghosting with pitches or phantom pitches and things like that. It's an endless debate Chris and I have, and I'm sure other agency owners listening to this will have. How do you decide when to go for a pitch? Sometimes you have a list of criteria you have to tick before you're willing to go for it, but sometimes the budgets or the brands justify going for something. I mean, how strict should you be as an agency in terms of?
Got to determine your own, and it's going to be so situational, but you've got to determine your own guardrails. You want visibility, I would suggest, of the budget holder. You want clear sight of objectives. You want clear timescales and so forth. But, you'll always find reasons to compromise around those situations, depending on the brand and the situation you're in. I mean, from a brand perspective, from a client perspective, there's always going to be reasons why, stuff's delayed or it doesn't happen, but there's just been some really bad practice around ghosting and the phantom pitch thing where, they go out to and a client goes out to 6 companies or 8 companies, immediately red flag, don't push it.
Yeah, we've had loads that we've turned down in decent brands as well. And we just how many are you going to? Oh, we're going to 8. We had one that said 13 once.
Yeah, and it's a very well-known brand. And they were going to 13 agencies. So what's your view on should agencies be paid to pitch?
Great.
I mean, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Why they're laughing?
Because it's hilarious. They've been fucking saying that since I started.
I've been paid to pitch once. I think
I have
20
as well.
years.
Yeah, maybe once or twice.
It's not going to happen.
No, they just go to someone else, wouldn't they?
Yeah. There is always somebody, and that's the problem with with agencies that are as bad as the worst clients, that there's always somebody will make the compromise and take the hit that you wouldn't be prepared to take. And, they will have a line lower than yours. Always.
Unless we can get every agency in the country to agree.
Yeah.
They won't, and then they'll still undercut you.
It won't happen.
Yeah.
It won't happen. There's been various conversations about, a shit list of bad clients that, take the piss and bad practice. Never happens.
So what does Stephen Waddington do? When he's not writing content, what does he do for fun?
I'm always on, mate.
I know. Well, you are. You're a workaholic, from what I can say.
Yeah.
Not only that, you then go and marry somebody else who's also a workaholic in public relations.
Yeah. So we've got 5 kids between us, Sarah and I. So that keeps you pretty busy. 2 of the boys are keen sportsmen. One plays football, one plays rugby. That keeps us busy. The older girls are both away and are making their own lives, but we're active and involved in them. with them. So, we've got a busy family life around us,
5 kids is enough to keep you busy. And you just done a half marathon as well.
Just an hour, keep me fit, trying to keep fit.
Great North Run.
Extend my life,
That was the Great North Run.
Great North
Excellent,
Run,
yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Was that last weekend, was it?
That's the
He's
right.
training. Will's training for a marathon at the moment.
I couldn't do a marathon.
I drunkenly signed up to a marathon.
No, I couldn't do a marathon. I get to the end of 13 miles and just like, no, that's it.
Will's got weird
that's more
OCD on running. He went on holiday to Mallorca for 2 weeks and got up every day at 6 a.m. to go running in 37-degree heat.
Yeah, because it's too hot in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah, but on holiday? What are you doing?
I did exactly the same. I did was at a conference in Dubai and was out at 6 o'clock in the morning just because you can't get the marathon otherwise.
As soon as it gets to 9 o'clock, it's crazy, isn't it?
I was going to ask you, I've got a question here. What's the biggest PR disaster you've seen? What's the worst PR crisis you've seen?
Or been involved with, if you can say
that's
that.
a good one, yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to. So you asked me for the fuck up, and selling an agency too early was my fuck up. The biggest crisis I've seen. I don't know. I need to think about that.
Been involved in, yeah. It's difficult because the problem with PR crisis work is you get involved and you sign an NDA and you can't say anything about all the stuff that you do. I just wondered if you had one, but
sorry, no. I'd rail against the shit ideas and boats being floated down the Thames.
That's what I always talk about.
Do we still do that? I think we.
And it still gets fucking coverage all the time.
Of course we do that.
I'm gonna float something down the River Air.
It's the new giant check shot, isn't it? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it's the giant check shot. Yeah. Or the gorilla van driving with a poster.
What do you call it? The mob. What do you call them? Flash mob.
Flash mob.
Yeah, flash mob.
Flash mobbing. Yeah.
The last one that I saw floated down the Thames was for the Borat movie, the new one, wasn't it? For Amazon.
Yeah.
They floated that down the Thames, and guess what? It got in all the national newspapers.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, because it makes it's a photo story. And it's become a cultural event now, hasn't it? Floating something down the Thames.
But it's not the creative.
It's a bit lazy, isn't it?
It's like if anyone says, the PR industry's not very creative, all they do is float stuff down the Thames, you're like, he's got a point there.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
So
you got to range it. It's again, right? Practice is so diverse. It goes from, people that will stick something on a boat and sail it down the Thames for a photo stunt, and it will make the national papers because it's a cultural moment, right the way through to people operating at the highest levels of government and organisations like the NHS doing really important life-saving stuff. We are a very broad discipline.
And then Paddy Power just moving the obligatory moving van outside when the Prime Minister's getting sacked, which happens every single time.
One question we sometimes ask our guests, who else do you think we should interview? Who do you think our listeners would find interesting? Is there anyone that springs to mind?
You should get Sarah on, just because she's absolute force of nature.
And a CBE.
CBE, yeah.
She's got that overview when anything.
She has, yeah. I can.
Does that Trump professor?
Basically, I'd have to get an eye.
It's like bloody top Trump.
No, I've given up on that. Totally given up on that. Any idea of an honour, because you just couldn't. No, but in all seriousness, we do. We've got this brilliant working relationship, but she has a totally different perspective to me. She'd be good. Alex Myers, I think. We've been taking the piss out of consumer PR, but Alex Myers, I think, is one of the smartest minds from a strategy point of view, understanding publics and consumers in the biggest sense. Andrew Bruce Smith, you've already spoken to.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on, Stephen. This will be out in a couple of weeks. So
good.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, so that chat with Stephen was different to normal. I think we went into it a bit differently than normal. This was a lot more about public relations today because Stephen is an expert in it, in communication and PR. And we talked a lot about disruption. It was quite interesting what he said about the 2 companies that he had as well. And the biggest fuck up that he had was the fact that he'd sold his company too early. So the fact that you and I are hanging on for dear life and never wanting to sell to anyone, well, that's probably a good thing, right?
And I think leading several agencies, he's been in this game long enough to have led agencies through various kind of economic crises, including the dot-com crash, and also involved in agencies during COVID. So I think some of the insight he gave us there about PR's role on the top table, I suppose, during those occurrences was really interesting. Also, I feel like this episode is a nice partner episode to the Andrew Bruce Smith episode on AI, and we obviously touched on AI, particularly the ethics side of it. And it's quite, and I think for all the kind of hype surrounding AI, people are worried that it's going to be like Terminator 2 all over again. I don't think that's the concern. The real concern is that it's a wild west when it comes to regulation, and there's no legislation around it, and nor is there likely to be in the next 2 or 3 years.
No, we're not. Basically, is legislation ever as fast as any sort of emerging technology? And the fact that this technology is like getting 10 times more intelligent every 6 months is the real worry. I know I laid it on a little bit thick, but I do think that I don't think Judgment Day is here, but the day of misinformation, as Stephen highlighted next year, in the elections, whether that's in the UK elections or in the US elections, disinformation. We might have our good friend Vladimir might be getting in touch with, controlling what happens in the elections. And we know that if Donald's involved, Mr. J. Trump, he's going to complain if he doesn't win. He's going to, do you know what I mean? So are we in the era of disinformation is what I'm saying.
There's actually a very good guide that Stephen wrote with Andrew Smith, a CIPR guide to ethics in AI, available on their website. So I think if anyone's interested in that, that's essential reading.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're going to check out, make sure you check out the episode with Andrew Bruce Smith, because that is really interesting. If you want to deep dive into AI, we're also running a webinar right at the moment. So if you want to come onto a webinar where we go into it a lot more detail, and Will and I do demos, be sure to check that out. Thanks everybody for listening to Socially Unacceptable. Please do subscribe if you like today's episode. Yeah, I know it's been a little bit different. If you do like today's episode, then subscribe where you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, and you get to see Will in, kind of 3D, and you get to see whether he's changed his shirt in the next episode. Until then, keep fucking up.
Thank you for listening to Socially Unacceptable. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a 5-star review. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn at Prohibition PR, and Twitter at Socially UA. We would love to hear some of your career fuck-ups so we can share them on the show. For more information on the show, search Prohibition PR in your search engine and click on podcasts. Until next time, please keep pushing the boundaries and embracing the socially unacceptable.